Is this a real?
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 72nd anniversary of the NHS Public Rally, which has been jointly organised by Keep Our NHS Public, Health Campaigns Together, the People's Assembly, and We Own It. And thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. This pandemic has brought all that's best out in us. The solidarity, the millions of people coming out clapping for carers, the 100,000 volunteers who've given their services to our health service, the staff adapting and tirelessly working over the last 5 months. It's our contention that the NHS has been let down by this government. There have been 64,000 deaths, which they claim is a success. Most of those deaths, we would contend, were preventable. And therefore, it's our accusation that this government has blood on its hands. But we're marking this anniversary to launch a rescue plan and a fight back. The NHS has been underfunded, under-resourced and privatised. The pandemic has affected us all. It's affected you all. But we now need you to join us in the fight. As Bevan said when it was set up in 1948, we will have an NHS as long as there's good folk prepared to fight for it. And now our lives, more than ever, will depend on a properly resourced and properly funded NHS. And our speakers will address all the issues that have arisen over the last few months and This rally has been sponsored by the 4 organisations I've mentioned, but we have the support of Arise, Build Back Better, Labour Assembly Against Austerity, MedAct, NHS Support Federation, Momentum, the National Pensioners Convention, NHS Staff Voices, the Socialist Health Association, Doctors in Unite, and the following trade unions, the TUC itself, Unite, Unison, GMB, Fire Brigades Union, Our NHS Deserves Better, the NEU. These are all trade unions who've given their formal support, but many others will be joining us this afternoon. Our rescue plan will be announced towards the end of the meeting. There will be bigger events taking place in September, but we'll come to that at the end of our rally. This event is being live streamed through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you're watching us, please hit the share button. We want as many people as possible to hear what we've got to say. This is being streamed widely, as our event on Friday night was live streamed outside Downing Street, which has had over 100,000 viewers. Today, we want to get that message out to more. So I'd like to begin today's rally by reading out a message of support from Ken Loach, who can't join us today. Hello to everyone, Ken says, and thanks for letting me send these few words. We've watched in horror as Johnson, Raab and Hancock, like a film of dodgy solicitors, stagger from one catastrophe to another. It would be comic if it weren't so tragic for those who've died unnecessarily, for the families who grieve for them. The health crisis has shown with devastating clarity what happens when the NHS itself is sick. The medicine, the campaigns who've organised this weekend have given us the prescription, back to the founding principles of Nye Bevan. Fully funded with all employees, from carers and cleaners to consultants, in secure jobs with full trade union rights. No outsourcing, no 0 hours, no contracts or poverty pay, no place for profiteering by private health companies, and a national care service organised along similar lines. But the medicine will be no good without someone to administer it. And that's the difficult bit. Those who should have argued for the ideas that we're discussing today have stayed silent during the pandemic. Just when people are desperate to hear the message, those who should be proclaiming it are simply talking of government incompetence. The root of the problem is not merely incompetence, it's a hostile ideology. Tories believe in the market. Big business will solve the problems. This is exposed as nonsense. It has reduced our health service to a shadow of what it should be. We have a crisis of leadership. We need people who both understand the fundamental changes you are demanding today and have the political skills and determination to carry them through. We must learn the lessons from Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and how he was undermined. Why did it happen? And who was responsible? We need the passion of youth and the knowledge and mature judgment of those who live with experiences. We need men and women who can run the big offices of state. We have talent in abundance. Please, those with the qualifications and the energy, come forward and play a leadership role. We need to stick together, hold fast to our principles, and organise like never before. Thank you. Solidarity, Ken Loach. So thank you for that message, Ken. And now we're going to move on to this wonderful panel of speakers we've got this afternoon. First of all, we have Dr. Sonia Adasara for Keep Our NHS Public. Sonia is a medical doctor specialising in reproductive health. She's consistently spoken out in the last 5 months about inadequate government action, about NHS underfunding, about migrant charges and the ongoing chaos. She will be speaking on behalf of Keep Our NHS Public, which is co-hosting today's event. She's correctly pointed out how this virus is being checked globally, but not in the country where economic priorities continue to trump our health needs. Sonia, over to you. Sorry, folks, I think we're having problems with Sonia's connection. We'll come back to you, Sonia, if we can, but at the moment we're unable to hear you on the broadcast. So our second speaker, if you're ready to go, Laura Pidcock, former MP for North West Durham in 2017, but lost her seat in 2019. She served in the shadow cabinet as business, energy and industrial strategy. She's remained very active in People's Assembly and continuing the struggle. People's Assembly has helped to coordinate and organise today's event. Laura, we're very pleased that you could join us. PA helped us to organise the 250,000 demonstration on the streets in 2017. We aim to do the same again, but even more in September. Laura, we're in the fight of our lives for the NHS. We hope you can help us to continue this struggle.
Thanks so much, Mike. And I'm pretty pleased I don't have to go after Sonia, actually, because I have huge love and admiration for her. But thanks so much for this platform on this exceptionally important occasion to mark the birthday of the National Health Service. The NHS is the most magnificent of political campaign achievements. We all have our own very personal reasons to love the way it can sustain the life of our loved ones and let us live healthier lives for longer. Even those who have lost loved ones will often look at the care which was received with warmth, even in the darkest of times. But we have to understand that the creation of the NHS was born of political achievement, but also that what has happened to the NHS, the whole reconstruction of the new system, is because of the political determination of major elements of the political class to turn it into an Americanized system. That the systematic closure of services, the defunding of the NHS, the removal of the duty of the Secretary of State for Health to provide services, the introduction of an internal market and therefore mass privatisation of services, the reduction of GPs, of local services, is all part and parcel of this intense ideological attack on the NHS. So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to allow this system, which is nursing us through a health pandemic, to endure anymore? I think most people will say absolutely not. First of all, we have to get really good at explaining what is happening to the system. Then we have to use every single area of influence we can to unite around a common set of campaign priorities. We need to ramp up public activism. We need to put pressure on every single elected representative. We need to be involved in the defence of the NHS, wherever you are. The defence of the NHS is a huge priority of the People's Assembly. We are in total solidarity with the health campaigns. We are here in support and willing to work in whatever way we can to build power in defence of the National Health Services. Please get involved in the People's Assembly. We're so proud to be opening Tolpuddle Festival on Friday, the 17th of July. So I will hopefully see you there. But the choice is literally this stark. We take action, or we let the NHS go to ruin at the hands of ideologues. Please join us in the fight. We absolutely can change the course of the NHS. That is in our hands. Join us. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was great. Our next speaker is Kevin Courtney. Kevin is the General Secretary of the National Education Union and has been to the fore in demanding that schools can only return when it's safe. We all stand full square with all education staff, parents and pupils in demanding a safe working environment. Kevin, we're going into a very dangerous time. The Tories appear to be throwing caution to the wind, and only the unions are making any sense in demanding every worker's right, a safe working environment. We trust and hope that you can sign up Keir Starmer to your cause. But over to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much. And I am so pleased to be here today speaking for the NEU at this rally, bringing you greetings from Mary Bousted, my co-general secretary. We're really pleased that the NEU is a supporter of Keep Our NHS Public, that in the recent past we've supported the struggles of the junior doctors and of the student nurses over their bursaries. Today, the 5th of July, is the NHS's birthday, but on a personal note, it's my mother-in-law's birthday. She died a couple of years ago. She would have been 95 today. And at every birthday party I ever went to of hers, she would always make a speech about the importance of defending the NHS. She told a story of when she was 14, before the NHS existed, and her dad had pneumonia, and they were on a farm. The mum had to stay and look after the cows. My mother-in-law took her dad to the hospital, and there was no NHS, and she had to lie, with the connivance of a nurse, to lie about her dad being in the Royal Legion, because otherwise he would have had no care. So she was always really clear. It is the duty of every working person in this country to fight for the NHS. I'm proud of the role the NEU, its reps and its members have played during this COVID crisis. And that's proud of the role in keeping schools open for the sons and daughters of key workers, doctors, nurses, delivery drivers, as well as protecting vulnerable people and putting pressure on the government to get the cases down and to get contact tracing before they widen opening in our society. We're worried about where they're going next. Sometimes people say schools should be open, and we want schools to be open. Sometimes people say schools in Denmark are open. And I tell you, the big difference in our country, our government went into lockdown too late, a week, a fortnight too late. The peak was much higher than it needed to be. Many more people have died because of that peak, and it takes a long time to come off that peak. And our country's schools' class sizes are also much higher than in other countries. Those are the reasons why our schools aren't open now. The government has undermined public service, and it's not just in education. They've undermined public service in the NHS. So I'm going to be clapping at 5 o'clock for this birthday celebration of the NHS. But I don't want doctors and nurses to have to be heroes to go to work. I want a government that invests, that plans for pandemics when they know that pandemics can come, when they will have PPE stockpiled. I don't want doctors and nurses to have to put themselves in harm's way. I want an NHS that is properly funded and an education service that is properly funded in our country. Let's all carry on campaigning to get the very best for the people of this country.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Very inspiring, and we agree with all your sentiments there. We think we've mended the gremlins, so we're going to return to Sonia, who's gone outside to get a better reception. I've already introduced Sonia Adasara for Keep Our NHS Public. So, Sonia, if you could switch your camera on, we're ready for you.
Hi, everyone. I feel very privileged to work in the NHS, and I feel very privileged to work alongside 1.5 million NHS workers who I see every day for those NHS values of kindness and compassion and fairness. But we're here today because we know that those values, that NHS spirit, is being undermined for decades now by those who want to profit from ill health. But we're at a crossroads now, and I do not want to go back to a system where we have people dying on A&E trolleys, to a system where 9.2 billion of NHS money goes into the pockets of the private sector, to a system where hundreds and thousands of NHS workers are on private outsourced contracts. Many of those contracts are insecure, poverty wages. Many of my colleagues have died in the past few months due to this lack of basic worker rights. And right now, given what's happened, we're still in a situation in my local hospitals where the cleaners are having to fight against the private provider who is trying to impose a contract on them without those basic rights, such as sick pay. And nor do I want a system where people are racially profiled as they walk into the doors of the NHS, nor do I want to work in an NHS where children are denied cancer treatment because their parents can't afford the migrant charges. Nor do I want to work in a system where right now women in our streets have died because they're too scared to go to the doctor because they are worried that they're put into a detention centre. So we need to organise and we need to fight now, because those who want to profit from ill health are already exploiting this crisis to further privatise and dismantle our NHS. And lastly, to finish, I think this crisis has shown us that equal access to healthcare doesn't mean equal protections from ill health. So Black people, people of colour, those living in the poorest parts of our country, those without wealth and privilege, were already dying prematurely before coronavirus hit us. So today I wanted to think about Bevan and to use that his radical, ambitious socialist vision to rethink and to rebuild our system, so we do not have a system where people are dying from poverty or from discrimination. We do not have a system where the air that we breathe is making us sick. We do not have a system where people on the other side of the world are dying as a result of our consumption and excesses and greed. So let's rebuild the system and let's have that radical vision of health justice and equality for all at its core. I've got my 3 minutes notice. Thank you very much and happy birthday, NHS.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I'm pleased we managed to get the gremlins mended just in time. Our next speaker is Helen O'Connor from the GMB Union. Helen was an NHS nurse for 28 years before becoming an organiser with the GMB. We welcome GMB's support today. The union is campaigning to end all privatisation, outsourcing and the private finance initiative. We're demanding all staff who are working in the NHS should be employed by the NHS. And the number of private companies now operating in the NHS is both a danger and a scandal. Helen, I know you were going to be bringing one of your reps with you today, but unfortunately she's unwell, but I'm sure that we wish her well and a speedy recovery, but over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And yes, I wanted to start by sending a message of solidarity from GMB rep Ernesta Natcote, who is unwell and unable to speak today, but she sends full solidarity to the rally, and she could have been here. She would have been here if she could have been. At age 72, our NHS is the envy of the entire world. In spite of years of cuts to NHS services and frontline staffing, most of us can still get free medical care in this country. Cuts and privatisation are undermining the ability of the NHS to deal with coronavirus. As a result, we have one of the highest death tolls in the world. Patients have been recklessly discharged from hospital beds, which has led to deaths. The privatisation of NHS logistics has obstructed efforts to get PPE into the hospitals. The lack of suitable PPE has led to the deaths of more than 300 NHS workers. Some of those were GMB members, some of those I knew personally. Companies like ISS and others demand workers like cleaners are super flexible. That means they expect them to work in multiple areas of the hospital. The needs of the business are spreading COVID-19 throughout our hospitals. In spite of the fact that a deadly pandemic is gripping this country, the minds of the NHS leaders are not concentrated on taking all steps necessary to ensure that our NHS is robust to deal with the second wave. The plans to reduce services in Epsom and St Helier are going ahead. Right now, Croydon NHS Trust is trying to force mandatory overtime onto midwives to cover up for cuts in the service. Some of those midwives are GMB members. They will resist this because they know it will put mothers and newborn babies at risk. The problem with accepting cuts and privatisation in the NHS is that cuts and privatisation cause harm to patients. They kill patients, and now they're killing NHS staff too. We can have a good healthcare system that can cope with a pandemic, or we can accept cuts and privatisation in the NHS. We cannot do both. All outsourced services must be brought back in-house. We must all unite together to fight and use every tool at our disposal to defend our NHS. And we have to be blunt about this. Privatisation is the organised, legalised theft of our public assets. Any politician from any party who is not prepared to commit to the nationalisation of outsourced services and bring them back in-house is no friend of the NHS. So let's build that campaign to ensure everyone has free and unrestricted access to safe, effective NHS services. And let's never again see the type of death toll that is the results of years of attacks on our NHS and years of cuts and privatisation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Helen. I couldn't agree more. Our next speaker is Dr. Candice Boomler. Candice is a Tower Hamlets GP and a prominent activist and spokesperson for Doctors in Unite, which is Britain's oldest medical trade union representing junior doctors, GPs and consultants. It campaigned for the NHS and now it's fighting to save the NHS. The Doctors in Unite are important allies of ours in the struggle to save the NHS and have joined today's online rally. Too many health professionals have contracted the virus and died, often through lack of proper equipment. So I hope that you will enjoy what Candice has got to say. Thank you, Candice, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Now, after 44,000 deaths, Johnson and his government are ending lockdown. So what's their record been? Still 3,000 new infections per day. The UK, despite having had months to prepare, has the highest death rate in Europe at 65 deaths per 100,000 population compared to 11 for Germany. So how did this shocking state of affairs come about? Why was the UK so badly prepared? Well, first, the government chose to believe that COVID was just a bad flu. This was against all the evidence published as early as January in The Lancet. They therefore ignored the need to get proper personal protective equipment and a test and trace and isolate system in place. They inexcusably delayed getting the NHS and the care system ready for what was known to be coming. And they waited criminally until the 23rd of March before starting lockdown 3 weeks too late. But secondly, this all happened on a background of austerity imposed after the banking crisis, an austerity programme that slashed and privatised our public services. How else to explain the decimation of public health facilities, the lack of contact tracers, the negligence of letting emergency stocks of PPE get out of date, £1 billion taken out of the public health system over the last decade. So there's no longer any local public health service of any capacity or credibility. That's why we've had to build up contact tracing from scratch. It's no coincidence that the two countries, the US and the UK, that have championed the neoliberal ideology of austerity the most have handled the pandemic in the worst possible way. Then third, there's the government's ideological belief in privatisation. So they abandon public procurement of PPE and they buy their stocks in an eBay-like fashion, stocks that turn out to be shoddy and have to be destroyed. They put money into privatised Nightingale hospitals that end up by not being used because there are insufficient trained NHS staff to staff them. Then they commission private lighthouse laboratories that do not integrate into the NHS IT systems and results go missing. This pandemic has held up a mirror to the inequalities in our society. Most commentators haven't thought about key workers before, yet they have died the most. Cruelly exposed have been our Black and minority ethnic population and our care home residents. Where were the policies designed to protect them? So finally, what do we need to do next? First and foremost, we need to protect our vulnerable groups, and no one in government is talking about that. Then we need to build health systems that truly protect the public. Security isn't about having nuclear submarines. Security means having a strong public health system embedded locally, a rebuilt public health laboratory service, contact tracing in our local GP networks. We need to end the way our privatised markets exploit us. Where are the politicians in government that have the courage to ask these questions? I don't hear them. So it falls to us to build a movement to make a better world. Thank you.
Roger Lewis.
Thank you very much, Cambies. And our next speaker will be Roger Lewis from Disabled People Against Cuts. Roger is a member of the National Steering Committee of DPAC, and their organisation has been playing a critical role, one, in giving people with disabilities a voice, and two, exposing that in this crisis, we weren't in all this together. The pandemic is lethal, and it preys on many of the vulnerable that our last speaker talked about. But this government has totally failed to take all of these different needs into account and continues to discriminate across the board. Over to you, Roger.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out at the start that I'm not on video. I'm severely visually impaired. I'm a blind person and video doesn't work for me, so I hope that's okay with everybody. I want to start with Black Lives Matter, because the Black Lives Matter movement is the fight to protect and defend our National Health Service. Why? Because the majority of the people that have died in the NHS, those on the front line, doctors, nurses, the porters, the cleaners, have disproportionately been from Black and minority and ethnic backgrounds. When we see the percentage of people who have died, tragically, from COVID, 25% have diabetes, a condition which is disproportionately experienced by the BAME community, Black people in particular, and from Asian backgrounds. These things are not unknown. When it comes to the lack of PPE, the lack of support for testing in the NHS, these things are calculated. Deaths are exactly the same as the death of George Floyd at the hands of the race in Minneapolis. When we see the disproportionate effect in social care of the number of people who have died in social care homes, residential and nursing homes, with blanket do not resuscitation notices being put on people who have learning disabilities, with a staffing group who are overwhelmingly from Black backgrounds, low paid, badly supported in terms of support and PPE. These things are calculated from a government whose cabinet is stuffed to the rafters full of people who are openly eugenicists. The speaker at the beginning of this session said that this government has blood on its hands. That is true. I'm accountable for that. So we need to bring these things together and fight together. One thing that DPAC has had in the 10 years that we've been fighting against austerity, in our fight for benefit reform. Let's not call it benefit reform. It's the fight to defend our welfare state and the social security system, which has social security, social care, and at the heart, our National Health Service. That in a word, is the welfare state. That is what we need to fight for. That's what we need to defend. So I'll finish on this. Two words, which is that we need to have unity of purpose and unity in action. And our message to everyone, and we recommit ourselves to this struggle from disabled people against cuts, is there's one word for that, and that's simple, it's solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger, and solidarity to Deepak as well. Our next speaker is Jonathan Ashworth. Jonathan is Shadow Secretary for Health. Jonathan joined us on our anniversary demonstration 2 years ago through the streets of London. He's spoken at many of our events, conferences and general meetings. And many of the issues that he addressed have been highlighted and magnified during this crisis: chronic cuts and underfunding, huge staff shortages, lack of PPE, failure of the private sector to deliver, the continuation and acceleration of outsourcing. We're demanding in our rescue plan that all services, including social care, are brought back in-house. We hope, Jonathan, that you can continue to support us and that we can rely on your support.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. And it's my pleasure to be here to express my solidarity with you, to thank Keep Our NHS Public for the campaigning that you do and campaigning that you will continue to do, and I will continue to support you in that campaigning. Today, we thank our brilliant NHS staff, and we remember the creation of an NHS 72 years ago. But of course, our remarks are tempered by the sad reality that 65,000 people have lost their lives, 65,000 excess deaths, that almost 400 health and social care staff have lost their lives to this horrific virus, a disproportionate number of them from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. So let us say never again should our health and social care staff not be given the proper protections, the PPE that they deserve. Never again should those on the front line, people of colour, not be given the proper risk assessments and protections they deserve from this horrific virus. Never again should we expect our NHS and social care staff to go to work all hours and not get the proper recognition in terms of pay. So I can tell you, we are campaigning for a pay rise for our health and social care staff. And never again should we allow social care staff to be subject to insecure work with no sick pay on 0 hours, because the statistics now show that those care homes which had a greater outbreak of COVID are the same care homes where the staff were temporary and didn't have sick pay and were exploited. Never again should we allow that to happen. And let us also dedicate ourselves to continue the campaign against cuts and closures that has seen over 15,000 beds gone, that last year saw over 800 acres of NHS land put up for sale and has seen services privatised. I'm talking to you today from Leicester. We're still in lockdown in Leicester. And the reason why we're still in lockdown is because a privatised testing service did not get our local Director of Public Health the relevant data, so we knew we had a problem until too late. And that privatised testing service wasn't recording addresses, wasn't recording ethnicity, wasn't recording occupations. That's why we've got to end privatisation. That's why we've got to kick these people out of the NHS, whether it's the Sercos or the Deloitte. We've got to restore a public national health service. And that is my commitment to you. And that is what I will continue to campaign on as Labour's Shadow Health Secretary. Solidarity to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Jonathan, for your ongoing support, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're now going to have a political poet. Jerry Potter hails from the Northwest. He's both a poet, a director, an actor and an author. Jerry's also a campaigner and is very passionate about the NHS, and I'm delighted that he can join us today. And after Jerry has spoken, I'll be handing the chair over to Louise Irvin, who's Secretary of Health Campaigns Together and on the executive of Keep Our NHS Public. Jerry.
Hello, am I back? Am I there?
You are. Hurry up, Jerry, you're on.
Oh, sorry about that. Just to say that this poem was, it's very similar to Michael Rosen's poem about fingers and hands, and it was written 25 years ago on the AIDS wards of the I'm here, and it's on the AIDS wards of the Chelsea and Westminster, and I was amazed at how remarkable the nurses were, and not just in the sense that they were nurses, but they were doing all kinds of comforting dying young men and counselling the families and counselling those young men and operating machines. And I was staggered by their fingers, how fast their fingers were. This is dedicated to nurses' hands. It's called Those Fingers. Those fingers, sheepfolding, bedside mannered and rolling, occasionally maybe scolding, running along the crease. Those fingers never cease, warring bodies needing peace. Those fingers administer release from pain. Those fingers, time and time again, tireless, priceless, trained, targeted, aimed. Those fingers, intricately humane and stitching. Switching from one role to another. Those fingers, sister, auntie, father, mother. Those fingers, smother, brother, and no matter other, those fingers offer handfuls of hope, the scope to cope and chill. Those fingers dishing out potion and pill. Those fingers fast, those fingers still. Friends, cleanse, kin, boss, win, loss. Those fingers see you through. Flu jab, brew. Never the don't when doing the do. Those fingers fight. Decades saving lives, soothing hives and mind. Those fingers thrive in living, selflessly giving. Those fingers kind. Brow mopped, never stopped, wiping bottoms, tops, transplanting organs, cleaning slops. Those fingers filling holes, full of drive and goals. Never half-hearted, getting stopped, heart started, cheeks parted, thermometer in, vomiter bold. Those fingers young, middle-aged, old, often warm, occasionally cold. Those fingers on fire, inspire, take society higher, seemingly never tire. Hands shaken with life-saving thanks, shouldn't be using food banks. Those fingers often thwarted, positions distorted, misreported, must always be supported, and after all they've done, all they've saved, sorted, must never be deported. Those fingers birth, those fingers death, close eyes, first breath, new moon, sunset, entering the world, simply the best, guiding the old, baby to breast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roger. That was really, really moving. It was just lovely to hear some spoken word about the NHS and about our wonderful nurses. I'm Louise Irvin, and I'm one of I'm the co-chair of this event. And just before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to remind you that this event has been brought together by Keep Our NHS Public, Health Campaigns Together, the People's Assembly, and We Own It. And keep your eye on the comments. Please share the live stream. Keep your eye on the comments because important information is going to be posted up during the day to tell you about all the different campaigns that are going on. Now, for our next speaker, I am delighted to welcome Roger Mackenzie, who is Assistant General Secretary of Unison. Health Campaigns Together has worked very well with all our unions, especially the health unions, over the years, and we've been so grateful for the support of Unison in our campaigning. So over to Roger.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Can I start off my contribution by paying tribute to all those workers in the NHS who've died during this COVID-19 crisis. Needlessly, harshly, scandalously put in harm's way by this government. And we should never forget that. And we should never forget that we have to hold this government to account for what they have done in killing these people. I also want to pay a particular tribute because there was a friend of mine in that photo montage that went on at the beginning. Donna Campbell from Wales, who's one of our members. Lots of those people who you saw were Unison members. but Donna Campbell was a particular friend of mine. And I know that she would join me in saying that we can't afford to treat the National Health Service as some kind of ancient memorial from years gone by. What we have to look at is a National Health Service that actually does what it says on the tin. It actually provides a National Health Service free at the point of delivery that does not depend on how much money you've got in your pocket to access those services. But it also needs to do this. It also needs to pay people for doing the job that they do. Because I'll tell you, it's all right people standing outside and applauding those NHS workers continually. And I'm not knocking that. It's great to have applause. It's great to have recognition for the job that you do. But I'll tell you this, applause doesn't put bread on the table. Applause doesn't pay the bills. Applause doesn't mean that you can send your kids to school in decent clothes every day. So we have to make sure that our National Health Service is free at the point of delivery, but also that that people are given the resources to do the job that they do, and also people are paid for what they do. My friends, this isn't just a time when we memorialise the NHS. It's not just a time when we applaud the NHS. This is a time when we stand up and we organise for the NHS. We can all make speeches about the NHS, but you know, this is a time for organisers. This is a time when we stand up and we go out and we organise and we don't apologise for what we stand for, which is a National Health Service that we can all be proud of. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roger. That was really passionate and inspiring. And I think you make the point very well. Applauding is fine, but we've got to act. We've got to get together. And I think what's great is unions and the staff that are members of unions, the people who work for the NHS and within wider society, working along with campaigners and standing up for the NHS. So now talking about organising and campaigning, it gives me great pleasure to now introduce Kat Hobbs, who is speaking on behalf of We Own It, a fantastic campaign that has campaigned. We've campaigned alongside We Own It many times to bring services back into public hands. So please welcome Kat.
Thank you, Louise, and it's a real honour to be here today with all of you and to be working hand in hand with Keep Our NHS Public, Health Campaigns Together, People's Assembly, Unison and so many others to campaign for the NHS. We Own It campaigns for public services for people not profit, from water to the railways, from council services to the NHS. We believe public services are the best thing that human beings have ever invented. And the NHS is probably the best thing of all. It's socialism in action, it's love in action. And this week, together with Build Back Better, we've been asking people to make birthday cakes for the NHS with an anti-privatisation message for the government, because it's about celebration, but it's also about what needs to happen next. And I've never seen so many beautiful cakes in my life. So solidarity is alive and well. 84% of us want our NHS to be in public ownership, not privatised. And yet in this crisis, we've seen private companies like Deloitte, Serco, G4S, Mighty, Sodexo using the crisis to, in their words, cement the position of the private sector. They're doing so with the help of government in a corrupt way. Edward Arger, the junior health minister, just happened to used to be the head of public affairs at Serco. Coincidence? I think not. And one of the not just tragedies, but scandals of the crisis has been the way in which our NHS supply chain has been privatised prior to the crisis. And it is a big part of the story of why our doctors, nurses and care staff were left without PPE, because it wasn't the government in charge of PPE. It was private companies like DHL, Unipart and Clipper Logistics. And if you want to learn more about that, our report, Privatised and Unprepared, is on our website. That's the bit you don't hear on the news. It's easy to be downhearted when this government has an 80-seat majority, but there is hope. The government has started U-turning on charges for migrant NHS workers, on school meals for children, and Boris Johnson's popularity is falling. So we have to campaign. And as I know many of you are already, solidarity, thank you for doing what you do. If this is a one-off for you, then don't just be there on the NHS's birthday. Every Thursday, we're not clapping anymore, but at We Own It, we're running a lunchtime webinar, 12:30 till 1 every single week. And we're talking about how to campaign for the NHS, how to get our NHS back. The campaigns we're working on right now are to protect the NHS from a trade deal, because right now it's very, very much on the table, and to end Serco's role in track and trace, and to bring track and trace into local control by local public health teams so that we can get out of lockdown safely. Our NHS deserves better, so we have to campaign together, all of the organisations here today, collaboratively, smartly. We have to campaign for an end to cuts and privatisation. We have to campaign for an inquiry into this crisis and the role that privatisation has played. We have to campaign to end outsourcing, revoke the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, and above all, we have to campaign to reinstate our NHS as a fully public service. That's what our NHS really wants for its birthday.
Thank you very much, Kat, for that very inspiring speech. I love that sentence, public services are the best things humans have invented. It's love in action. And now I'm delighted to welcome Laura Ho, who comes from the organisation Build Back Better, another organisation that's seeking to bring together people, a broad coalition of people to campaign. And one of the things they're campaigning on at the moment is for a coronavirus recovery plan that builds back better. So welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Louise, and thank you to everybody who's been involved with organising today. It's been really uplifting hearing you all speak. And firstly, just a message of solidarity from the Build Back Better campaign to all of those who are working on the front line at the moment. The Build Back Better campaign, I'll just tell you a little bit about it in case you don't know, is a broad campaign made up of many social, health and climate justice organisations and activists, and we're calling on the government for an investment-led recovery from the coronavirus crisis to tackle the underlying structural inequalities and build an economy that is able to tackle the climate crisis. We actually got described this morning by Robert Colville in the Times as concealing a backdoor to a socialist revolution, and I will neither confirm nor deny that. But I actually think that what we're calling for is becoming more and more common sense. We know that the pandemic has kind of turned our world upside down in many ways, but also what it's mostly done has just exposed major weaknesses in our economy that have always been there, exposing the deep-seated inequalities in our society that have always been there. And we've seen that because the most vulnerable have been hit the hardest. But what we realise now is that this is a moment in which what we do next could change everything. As the world recovers, we have a chance to kind of reset the clock and build something better than what we had before. We know that we need something new. We need a new deal that prioritises people, that invests in our NHS and creates a robust, shock-proof economy that is capable of tackling the climate crisis. So what we're calling for is 5 things. We're calling for securing the health and needs of everyone in the UK now and into the future, protecting and investing in our public services, rebuilding our society with a transformative Green New Deal. And something that's really important to mention here is that green jobs, we're calling for massive investment in green jobs, but green jobs don't just mean building solar panels and building wind turbines. Care jobs and NHS jobs are green jobs. These are jobs which are extremely low carbon and the kinds of jobs that we want to be investing in. So basically, I just want to provide some hope because we have a huge number of organisations behind us, from lots of different unions, climate organisations, social justice organisations. We had 350 civic leaders last week come out in support of the campaign. And actually, we found last week that only 6% of the British public want things to go back to normal after the pandemic. So this, like, what we're calling for is becoming common sense, is becoming kind of the public demands. So we're at this fork in the road. Let's not go back to business as usual. Let's tackle the inequality crisis. Let's make people's lives better. Let's stop our economy from hurtling towards climate catastrophe. Let's do something new. And please feel free to join us in building back better. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was very insightful and also full of hope about building a better society. And health is about much more than the NHS. It is about dealing with and getting rid of all the inequalities in our society. So thank you for that contribution. I'm now delighted to welcome Rachel Ambrose, who is a child and adolescent mental health nurse and also member of National Nurses United. Welcome, Rachel.
Hello, Louise, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm a mental health nurse with 15 years experience working in both mental health and public health. And I'm also a member of Nurses United, which is a grassroots organisation made up of frontline nurses who are organising to coordinate and campaign and take action on issues that affect our profession and our patients. I've seen a lot of changes in the years in the NHS over the years. Firstly, as a student nurse, and back then I benefited from receiving a bursary. I didn't have to pay tuition fees like the student nurses of today, who are unfortunately leaving university at the start of their careers in tens of thousands of pounds in debt. We need this government to address this issue urgently and to ensure that we're able to attract and retain the nurses that our NHS needs to function as the wonderful health service that we know it can be, and can continue to provide care free at the point of delivery as it was intended by Bevan 72 years ago. COVID has highlighted the need for greater investment in mental health services, which has always been the Cinderella service, and to ensure that we can achieve the parity of esteem that is often talked about. We've all been affected by the impact of social distancing and lockdown, but I want you to consider for a minute being a young person with mental health problems, receiving treatment and support in hospital or a placement miles away from your family and your home. A parent juggling not only being a parent, but also homeschooling and being a therapist to their child with autism. Or a parent juggling the needs of a child with depression and severe self-harm risks, and the prospect of losing your job if you have to call in sick again because your child has taken an overdose. Families out there are really struggling, and we need to increase the funding for the NHS and wider social support structures to keep them from further adversity, which is going to impact them in their future and for generations to come. There's been a huge drop-off in referrals to child and adolescent mental health services, with children not being able to regularly access the usual places that would refer them for support, like school. Prior to COVID, our CAMHS waiting lists were already too long, and this backlog could lead to serious consequences when the predicted surge in cases after lockdown occurs. There's already been an increase in urgent and emergency cases, including patients with suicidal thoughts and self-harm. I'm proud to work for the NHS, but we need to have more investment to ensure that waiting lists for CAMHS assessments and treatments aren't months or in some cases up to a year long, that they're available for young people when they need it to avoid them going into crisis and prevent unnecessary stays in hospital miles away from home. And finally, when young people do spend time in hospital, they shouldn't have to travel miles to access the appropriate provision. So please get involved with Nurses United and sign the petition to Parliament to improve mental health services for our children and young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you for reminding us of the importance of mental health and the importance of building in good and better mental health services as part of our campaign to improve the NHS. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just would like to remind everybody that this rally is being organised by Health Campaigns Together, Keep Our NHS Public, People's Assembly, and We Own It. And if you're, wherever you're watching it, please share the live stream and keep an eye on the comments, because every time somebody talks about a campaign or an initiative or an event that they're involved in, we'll be posting the links and the information about that on the live stream. So please keep an eye on that. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jess Potter, who is speaking on behalf of Docs Not Cops. Docs Not Cops is a fantastic organisation that has campaigned very, very vigorously, along with us, along with our campaigns together, Keep Our NHS Public and many other organisations, against the hostile environment in healthcare and against migrant charges. And a really important issue at the moment, as we hear that many people have been afraid to seek help for coronavirus-linked symptoms because they're afraid of being reported to the Home Office or being charged, or just because they're afraid. We've created a situation where people are afraid to access healthcare. So I'm going to please welcome Jess.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Louise has just said, my name is Jess Potter and I'm a doctor and public health researcher. And for the duration of the pandemic, I've been working on intensive care in East London. I'm speaking today on behalf of Docs Not Cops. We're a grassroots organisation of healthcare workers and non-healthcare workers alike. And we've been campaigning since 2014 to end the NHS overseas visitors and migrant charging policy and other forms of immigration control in the NHS. Denying people the care they need because of who they are, because of where they come from, or because of the colour of their skin is fundamentally wrong. The ability to access healthcare is central to improving health systems for all health outcomes for all populations and is vital for the functioning of an effective public health system. 72 years ago today, the NHS was founded to be a universal, non-discriminatory healthcare system, free at the point of service. But policies and practices associated with the hostile environment undermine these values. For people not born in the UK and others racialised as foreign, the NHS charging regulations and other practices such as data sharing between the NHS and the Home Office represent a threat not just to health, but to life. Alfreda Spencer, Kelamur Mulat, Asayas Welde, Pauline Pennant, Beatrice, Bhavani Aspati, Yvette White, all people who came to harm simply because they needed to access healthcare in the UK. And finally, even in a global pandemic, a man known to us as Elvis died at home from coronavirus, too afraid to seek the care he needed, paying the ultimate price. The fact that people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities have disproportionately worse health outcomes is not a new phenomenon uncovered by COVID-19. We must address racism and discrimination in all its forms across society and within all our institutions, including the NHS. At no point in the 12 years I've been a doctor have I ever considered whether the person in front of me deserves my care. To do so would be to fundamentally undermine the value of universality that makes the NHS so unique. And to do so would also shatter the foundations of who I am as a healthcare professional, because the NHS is us and we are the NHS. Those of us in Docs Not Cops refuse to sit by quietly, complicit in this harmful, discriminatory regime of hostility. No one should be afraid to come to hospital when they're unwell. No one should weigh up deportation or deprivation with their need for health. It is imperative we act together. The government's policies are to blame here, but we cannot and will not stay silent while NHS trusts turn a blind eye to the harms caused by policies they implement, because to challenge them would be to interfere with politics. But silence is also a political act, and people's lives are at risk, and the very foundations of the NHS are at stake. Their silence is complicity. But together, we can end the hostile environment in health, and we can challenge systemic racism. Together, through broad-based solidarity with common interest in the universal right to health, justice and equity, nothing is impossible. I'm a doctor, not a border guard. We are Docs Not Cops, and we will never stop fighting for patients not passports. Please join our Patients Not Passports campaign.
Thank you very much, Jess. Thank you very much for that passionate talk and for reminding us of the founding principles of the NHS, which is universal, compassionate care for all without exclusion. And our role as doctors is to provide care for those who need it, and we shouldn't be sitting there in judgment and acting as border guards. So thank you. Just to remind you all that you just check if it's been live streamed, just check the comments, because it will have all the links to the various campaigns that are being discussed just now. With the final speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome John Lister, who is the editor of Health Campaigns Together, an amazing person whose history of campaigning for the NHS spans more than 30 years, and who has drafted our 2020 vision to rebuild the NHS. And this is a document that is going to be posted online and is a draft document because we want people to contribute to it. And it's our vision which is going to bring together a set of demands that we can, all the different campaigns we hope in their different ways can join together and fight for. So please welcome John Lister.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you so much to all the previous speakers who have filled in some of the topics that were covered in the rescue plan. And so I will be dealing very briefly with that in my allotted time. 72 years ago, our NHS was established in a weakened economy in the aftermath of the war. It was a great leap into the unknown for the Labour government, which had no idea how much a health service would actually cost. But they knew the old system was unsustainable. They knew that charges for care were excluding millions of people, especially women, children, and older people, from accessing GP or hospital care. They knew that most of the patchwork of thousands of different separate, mainly small hospitals, voluntary and municipal hospitals, were virtually bankrupt. And so rather than bail out and spend millions propping up an old rotten system, Nye Bevan led the way to a new system. And today, once again, in a similar fashion, we're at a crossroads. The NHS has been fragmented and weakened by 10 years of underfunding, 30 years of market reforms, 36 years of contracting out and privatisation. NHS England has now had to bypass the law in order to get the system working together to combat COVID-19. COVID came straight after a winter where, once again, our underfunded, understaffed NHS had fallen further behind on almost every performance target, with waiting lists soaring above 4 million. Private contractors keep proving they're not the solution, but a major part of the problem. They're now putting all our lives at risk as they screw up testing, tracking and tracing of COVID infection. And the bulk of the social care system is on the brink of bankruptcy. Now, whichever way people voted last December, nobody voted for this. Nobody applauding the NHS at 5 o'clock today will be applauding the state it's in. They'll be applauding what it stands for. And almost everyone will therefore agree with us that our NHS deserves better than this. And that's why we're so confident today in launching a campaign for our rescue plan for the NHS, identifying the key steps needed to move forward from here. It's online for everyone to see on the Health Campaigns Together and Keep Our NHS public websites. And I've only time to take a few points that haven't really been fully covered by other speakers. So I'll say firstly, we need more funding to equip our NHS to cope both with COVID-19 and with routine and emergency care. The 34 billion increase, which Boris Johnson keeps announcing for NHS funding up to 2024, is a limit now fixed in law. But it's a limit that is far too low. It's just £20 billion in real terms over 5 years. That's neither generous nor adequate, especially since COVID-19. Much more is needed. And we need also capital. We need to tackle the 6 billion of backlog maintenance in the NHS, which means that to make it possible for trusts to refurbish their buildings, reorganise services and reopen as many as possible of the 37,000 NHS beds that were left empty as part of the measures to cope with COVID since April. 37,000 beds are still empty now, or we don't know because NHS England will not release the figures, how many are still empty. Now, Rishi Sunak may grumble about all of this, but of course, investment in this will not only create useful jobs in refurbishing and improving the use of our existing facilities in the NHS, but it will also minimise the short-term dependence on costly private hospitals to tackle waiting lists at the expense of NHS trusts. We must invest in improved pay and conditions, as people have said, to enable the NHS to retain, recruit and train the staff we need. Instead of rushing through outdated pre-COVID plans for new hospitals, we need a full review of the needs for investment right across the NHS, in hospitals, in mental health, in GP and community services, and in expanding public health measures and services to keep us safe. We need a national care and support system to rescue social care from bankruptcy and collapse. And we need to roll back privatisation and repeal the legislation and regulations that have driven privatisation and contracting out and block the reintegration of our NHS in England as a single national, publicly owned and publicly accountable service. Health Campaigns Together and Keep Our NHS Public are calling on politicians of all parties to discuss our rescue plan with us and help develop it and to support it. Never mind Kanye West hijacking our title, it is our 2020 vision. For a better, fairer, safer NHS for all of us. We urge everyone who's taken part this afternoon to join us in building local and national campaigns to make it happen. Let's build our NHS and let's keep it public. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And thank you to all our speakers. It's been inspiring and it's covered a really broad range of issues that are all relevant. But what I think is really great is it's shown you all the different campaigning groups and all the work that's been done. And it's marvellous that we're all working together, which I think is the answer going forward. I feel really inspired by what's happened this afternoon, really energised. Lots of the campaigns and things that have been mentioned, the links have been posted. I just want to take this opportunity to just make a few announcements and to just highlight some of the most important things. So as John said, the launch of our 2020 Vision for Healthcare, a rescue plan for the NHS by Keep Our NHS Public and Health Campaigns Together has been launched today, and the link is being posted on the comments. I'd also urge you to join We Own It for their weekly lunchtime webinar every Thursday at 12:30, and the link for that is in the comments. We Own It's two main campaigns right now are calling for protection of the NHS from trade deals and for vital testing and tracing programmes to be run by local public health and health teams. I'd like to also announce that the People's Assembly are opening this year's Tall Puddle Martyrs Festival on Friday the 17th of July, and they're calling for all organisations here and beyond to join them on Day X. They haven't decided the day yet because it depends on what's allowed, but they will call when it is safe to do so, a huge national demonstration to hold this government to account for 10 years of austerity. It's undermining of the NHS and its shameful handling of COVID. For NHS and social care workers, we're asking you to join an NHS Staff Voices conference to be held on Saturday the 18th of July. Again, the details are in the comments. Rachel Ambrose talked about urged nurses to join National Nurses United. The links are there too. And last of all, we're going to ask you to go to all the organisers' websites, the 4 organisations that organise this event, and go to their websites, join them, donate, get involved. That's the most important one, is get involved. So that's keepournhspublic.com, healthcampaignstogether.com, thepeoplesassembly.org.uk, and weownit.org.uk. So all I have to do now is once again thank all our marvellous speakers and thank the team that's done all the tech stuff that's made this possible. And let's wish our NHS a happy 72nd birthday, but the best birthday gift we can give it is to commit ourselves to fight together to secure its future and build an even better NHS for generations to come. Thank you.